Hello and welcome to another Magic the Gathering draft video. It's Al here with you. This is how to draft MTG. We're looking at Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate and my draft format update for the set. If you're just jumping in, maybe you don't have a lot of experience with the format, maybe you're coming back, maybe this is a flashback draft, kind of hopefully not, but maybe it is. Or maybe you're having trouble with the format and you're just looking for some perspective on how to approach the format. I'm going to show you and explain how I've been drafting the set, and I've tried to distill this information as best as I can in a way that is clear and hopefully easy to understand. So let's get into it. Before we do, I'll remind you to please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoy what we're doing here. It helps the channel a huge amount. Let's talk about the basics of the format. If you follow these 5 quote-unquote rules, you're going to have a good amount of success no matter what archetypes you're drafting. So we want 6 or more 2-mana creatures in all of our decks, and we want to mulligan hands without a 2-mana play in-game. It's very important to be on the board early. This format is extremely fast, so we want to make sure that we have a lot of creatures that can come down early and start to pressure our opponents. Don't splash unless you have treasures or our base green. We want to keep it to 2-color decks. The format, again, is just too fast for us to sit around and wait to hit our colors. We're trying to play streamlined aggro decks, and splashing does not really lend itself to those strategies. However, if you have access to a bunch of treasures incidentally, or if you're in the green deck, those are great places to splash. We want to be the aggressor. It is very hard to catch up to your opponent when they get off to a good start. I'm sure a lot of you have had the experience where your opponent goes 1-drop, 2-drop, 3-drop, and there's just literally nothing you can do. You play a blocker, they remove it, and the game's over in 4 or 5 turns. You want to be that person. So we want to be building our decks planning to be the aggressor, planning to be the player that is coming out ahead early. And finally, don't build around the macro synergies. Those are dragons in the teamer colors, blink in blue-white, life gain in green-white, and treasure in black-red. Although treasure is just really good on its own, but there is no reason to really dive into that theme. None of these are well supported enough that they're worth warping our deck around. We can have little pockets of synergy where a few cards are working together in a good way, but generally speaking, we just want to build our decks to have a great curve and to be aggressive and not worry too much about these macro synergies. The gates are all high picks, except for the blue one, because we almost never really want to be in blue, but I guess if you are in blue, then the blue gate is a very high pick as well. These cards should be taken just under the top uncommons and commons of their color. They essentially give us access to an extra spell in our deck because they don't take up a spell slot, they take up a land slot. They're really good. Take them higher than you're currently taking them, and I think you'll be rewarded for that. And just quickly on Pilgrim's Eye, this card is just good pretty much in any deck at any point. Even in an aggressive deck, it's a 3-mana 1/1 flyer that draws a card. Sure, it's a land, but sometimes that's exactly what we need on turn 3. If you remember a card called Inspiring Overseer from the previous set, this is not nearly as good as that, but it's still along those lines, and I think it's a little underrated at this point in time. Obviously, if you're trying to splash, this is a card that you'll really want to prioritize. Okay, so I'll talk a little bit about the archetypes I'm trying to draft and the order I'm trying to draft them in. Going into every single draft, I'm trying to be white aggro above anything else. If I'm trying to win, if I'm trying to just mess around, then that's different. But if we're talking about trying to win, I'm always trying to be white aggro from the first pick of the first pack. If it turns out that white aggro is not available, I'm looking to be black-red aggro. This is in part because black and red support white aggro really well, so that always gives me a chance to sort of pivot back into white if white becomes available later in the draft. But if white's not available, black-red's a great place to be as well. These two decks, white and black-red, function very similarly to each other. Just lots of 2-drops, a little bit of removal, and just beating down your opponent. If I'm not seeing any good cards in the first few picks from white, black, or red, I'll look to green as a tertiary option. I have not ended up in green all that often, as white, black, and red are so deep at common and uncommon, and their decks just fit my playstyle really well. But green is definitely a very viable place to go as well in this format. And many of you probably know this already, but blue is the worst color by a lot, and I don't think that blue should ever be your base color of your deck. It's fine to splash in a green ramp deck, and it's fine as a support color to a white aggressive deck if you've got a lot of good white cards, but I would recommend avoiding blue pretty much at all costs. Alright, so getting into drafting the archetypes. White aggro, my favorite archetype, the best archetype in the format according to 17lands.com. Reasons to get into this deck: Rasad, Monk of Saloon, which is the best uncommon in the set, Sea Tower Imprisonment, which is not too far behind, and Blessed Hippogriff, which is the best common in the set. We've also got Priest of Ancient Lore, Patriarch's Humiliation, and Steadfast Unicorn. So these 6 cards are well ahead of many of the other commons and uncommons in all the other colors. White is extremely deep, and if we're seeing any of these early, we're definitely trying to move into white aggro. Next, we're looking for a critical mass of 2-drops. As I said, minimum 6, but I'm happy to play 8, 9, 10 2-drop creatures. All 4 of these 2-drops, Boreskier, Tollkeeper, Flaming Fist, Duskguard, Steadfast Paladin, and Soldiers of the Watch, are all fairly interchangeable, but I would say the first 2, the 3/1 creatures, are slightly better. A little note on the Tollkeeper: I think it's correct a fair amount of the time to choose a land in your opponent's hand. I've noticed my opponents that play this against me tend to choose my creatures, and even having your 3rd or 4th or even 5th land come into play tapped can really mess up a lot of strategies, especially if the opponent is on the back foot and they're trying to deploy a blocker on turn 3 or 4 and their land is coming down tapped. White's also got a pretty good suite of interaction here with You're Confronted by Robbers, which can just sort of win the game out of nowhere by tapping your opponent's creatures, or make 3 dudes if that's what we need as well. Guiding Bolt, which is a bit of a surprise. I didn't really see this one coming. At 3 mana, destroy creature with power 4 or greater and scry 2. It's just a lot of value on one card, and getting a big thing out of the way is exactly what we want when we're the aggressor. And then, of course, You Hear Something on Watch. This is not at its best in aggro, but it's still pretty solid because it can act as a combat trick and win games out of nowhere with the +1/+1 side. And when you get into a racing situation, which happens very often in aggro mirrors where your opponent can't really block your creatures because they're afraid of combat tricks, this can catch their creature on the way back. The best color to support white, in my opinion, is black. Reasons to move into black as our secondary color would be Viconia, Nightsinger's Disciple, Skullport Merchant, and Guildsworn Prowler. These cards are all quite excellent. Black also gives us access to some great interaction in the form of Shambling Ghast, which really blanks a lot of 1, 2, and sometimes 3 drops on the opponent's side as a blocker. Cast Down and Grim Bounty, which are just 2 premium removal spells, and then Black Dragon, which is a nice curve topper that can deal with an important threat on the other side of the battlefield and then finish off our opponent. Minthara of the Absolute is not as good as I'd originally thought. It's really good if you have access to a lot of treasure, but if you don't, it's still good. It's just not as good as the cards we've just talked about. The other best option to pair with white is red. Cards that will make us want to do this are Battlecry Goblin, Mephit's Enthusiasm, Ambergris, Citadel Agent, and Red Dragon. Again, we're just going full-on aggressive, and all of these cards really lend themselves well to that strategy. Liara of the Flaming Fist is also quite good once we start to establish ourselves in this color pair. Red is also pretty deep at common, with Dragon's Fire as a premium removal spell, Genasi Rabble Rouser, and Hobgoblin Captain as excellent 2-drops, and Kobold Warcaller is a really nice 1-drop that can get the party started for us. If we're deep enough on white cards, which does happen from time to time, we can support the white aggressive shell with just really good green cards or really good blue cards, but we're not looking to be deep in either green or blue in this style of deck. Some overrated cards to talk about. I've had a look on 17 lands, and my suspicions have been confirmed that these cards are being taken higher than their win rate warrants. Moradine's Disciples. This one looked excellent. I had it in my top uncommons in my initial set primer, but it's just a little bit too slow. 4 mana 2/3 is just not a great stat line. Rescuer Chwinga is fine as a 2 mana 2/2, but because we're so incentivized to play to the board early and often, returning a creature to our hand is just really not something we're ever interested in doing. So I would bump this down in your pick order. Portable Hole, another card that I was a big fan of going in, but again, it's just not very profitable to be reacting to what our opponents are doing. We want to be the aggressor. We want to be posing the threats and making them have the answers. So portable hull, not as good as it has been in the past, and also gets worse in multiples too, so be aware of that. And then finally, this is probably the biggest offender, is Minimus Containment. Again, we don't want to be reacting. 3 mana's a lot, and giving our opponent a treasure is not great for us either. This is a card that I'm looking to not play, whereas these other 3 I would sort of play begrudgingly. I'd recommend taking almost any decent creature over Minimus Containment. So our next archetype is Black-Red Aggro. Reasons to get into this are, of course, the best black and red cards: Battlecry Goblin, Mephit's Enthusiasm, Skullport Merchant, and Viconia Nightsinger's Disciple. I'm sure most of you know how awesome all of these cards are. Black-Red's got some excellent creatures as well: Guildsworn Prowler, Shambling Ghast, Red Dragon, Goblin Trap Finder, really good with Guildsworn Prowler, really good with double team creatures as well. Ambergris Citadel Agent, Sepulchre Ghoul, Kaline Reclusive Painter, where the treasure theme isn't really what we're going for here, but the added ramp and the extra stat boost to a creature is quite nice. And Vampire Spawn. This one really helps swing races in our favor and can even deal the last couple of points to the opponent. The real strength of Black-Red, of course, is the interaction. We get some of the best removal in the set: Cast Down, Grim Bounty, and Dragon's Fire. A few overrated cards to talk about. Again, these are being taken higher on average than their win rate would justify. Swashbuckler Extraordinaire, a pretty good card, but it seems to be taken higher than it should be. Again, the treasure theme just really isn't something that we're trying to build towards. Goot Fanatical Priestess, just a little too expensive. 6 mana, 4/3. Card's fine, but I would not look to pick this up until much later in the draft. Knoll Hunting Party. This is one that I was pretty hot on early, but it's really a lot better in red-white, as that deck tends to amass more creature bodies to help cast it. It's not at its best in black-red. And then finally, Dragonborn Immolator. This card is just not good, but it looks cool, and it's got a lot of text on it. So yeah, just don't ever take this card. Two-Handed Axe. I don't know who's taking this, but someone is, and please stop. It's not a good card. Sewer Plague. This card is actually pretty good, but it's taken quite highly and is definitely not better than any of the removal that we've discussed thus far. Again, 3 mana is a lot. Reacting to our opponents is not really what we want to be doing in the format, so consider taking Sewer Plague a little bit lower. And then finally, Young Red Dragon. It's a dragon, but it can't block, and it's expensive, and I'm looking to almost never put this in my deck. Finally, we've got Green Ramp, so if white, black, and red don't pan out, we can jump into green. Underseller Myconid. This is a card that I was too low on in my initial evaluation. This is really the straw that stirs the drink of green ramp decks. We want 2, 3, or 4 of these in every one of our green decks, and the reason being is it does everything we want. It ramps us, and it provides a bunch of bodies to keep us alive in the early game, which is super important because as we've discussed, the best decks in the format are trying to kill you as quickly as possible. So any successful green ramp deck is going to have ways to not die early, ways to ramp, and then big creatures to ramp out. So I can't stress enough how important Underseller Myconid is to the deck. If you're not seeing any of these, you should not be drafting green. Dread Lenorm is the best of the big creatures at common or uncommon to be ramping towards. Jaheira Harper Emissary is just a good card, so put it in your deck. And then Draconic Muralists is a really nice 4-drop that trades for something and then finds our Dread Lenorm or maybe some crazy rare dragon that we've drafted. Past those 4 top cards, our strategy is pretty simple. We're trying to ramp with cards like Druid of the Emerald Grove and Prosperous Innkeeper into big fatties such as Hill Giant, Herd Gorger, and Owlbear. It's worth noting that green's commons and uncommons do drop off a little bit after these 4 cards that you're looking at here. So again, if we're not seeing some of the aforementioned green cards, the Myconids, the Dread Lenorms, and we're not really seeing any of these cards, we don't want to be drafting green. Unsurprisingly, the best color to support green with is white, because white gets all the best cards in the set. So just put the good white cards in with your green ramp cards, and you'll do pretty well. Likewise, black, being the second best color in the set, is also a great option to support your green ramp decks. Both white and black help us to not die early in the game with good 2-drops and removal spells, and black in particular has some nice stuff to ramp towards, including Black Dragon. Some overrated cards in green ramp: Scanos Dragon Vassal. This card is okay. but it's being taken at a higher rate than any other uncommon in green. As a 5-mana 4/4, it's not better than Dreadlenorm, it's not better than Herdgorger, and it's definitely not better than Underseller Myconid, so make sure you're taking those cards higher than Scanos. Emerald Dragon, I understand people are trying to do the dragon thing because it looks cool, but it's just not that good, and we need our big fatty creatures to come down and stabilize us, which Dreadlenorm and Herdgorger, and to a lesser extent Owlbear, do a better job of than Emerald Dragon. Scaled Nurturer is okay if we have a ton of dragons, but a 2-mana 0/2 is not a great blocker, and as we've said, the dragons theme is really just not that well supported. And finally, Underdark Basilisk, 2-mana 1/2 Death Touch. It's barking up the right tree in the sense that it's trying to keep us alive early, but in reality, this is just going to trade for our opponent's 2-drop or die to the Blessed Hippogriff adventure, and then we're just going to get run over. To summarize, draft white, followed by black-red, followed by green, avoid blue pretty much every time, play lots of 2-drops, and be the aggressor, and you'll do just fine in Alchemy Horizons Baldur's Gate draft. That'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. Please do click like, leave a comment, let me know how you're drafting the format. Do you agree with my analysis? Do you disagree? And of course, please click subscribe. It helps the channel so much. I can't tell you how much it means to me when people click subscribe. Thank you so much once again. We'll see you for another video very shortly. Bye for now.